When my husband pointed at the front door and said in a low, steady voice that I was free to leave if I wasn't satisfied, I realized I'd spent years living under a roof he used as a threat. There was no yelling, no scene, just that cruel calm, the calm of someone who believes he has the right to decide who stays and who goes. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not loudly, but deeply. Like when you realize you were never safe, just tolerated. I stood there, feeling the cold floor under my feet and my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I looked down, not out of submission, but because I had learned that meeting his eyes came at a cost. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I'd already cried too much in silence, locked in the bathroom, faucet running so no one could hear me. Fear had always been my most loyal companion. Fear of aging into invisibility. Fear of being alone. Fear of having nowhere to go. That fear is what led me down the aisle. It wasn't love. It was emotional survival. And if this story already squeezed something inside you, stay with me. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another woman who might also be living in silence, because this story isn't just mine. It's a mirror for so many. I said yes with my throat tight. I remember people smiling, hands waiting for my answer, and me silently calculating what would happen if I said no. I knew from day one that this marriage would require caution, not surrender. It was like walking into a house while already mapping the emergency exits. I learned to measure words, schedules, even the tone of my voice. Not because I was cold, because my body recognized danger before my mind did. He never had to raise his voice to command me. He just had to suggest it. I think you should sit over there. Don't you think you spent too much? Maybe it's not a good idea to see that person. Everything came wrapped as concern, but it tasted like control. Little by little, I got smaller. My clothes turned more neutral. My opinions got shorter. My wants were tucked away in drawers I pretended didn't exist. And no one seemed to notice. Or they noticed and found it convenient. The house was beautiful, organized, too quiet. He started calling everything mine, my house, my roof, my rules. Every time I heard it, something tightened in my chest, like a warning I still couldn't translate. It felt like living somewhere you aren't allowed to open the windows. Everything looks fine from the outside, but you can't breathe. The humiliations were never big enough to become a scandal. They were small, constant, almost invisible. Corrections in front of other people, always with a joking tone. Little laughs when I said something out of place. And if I showed discomfort, the phrase that cut the deepest would come. "You're too sensitive." That's when I understood embarrassment was a tool. It wasn't an accident. So I stopped reacting. I started watching. Silence became my way of protecting myself. Maybe you recognize that silence, the kind that isn't agreement, it's exhaustion. How many times have you swallowed words just to avoid a fight? How many times have you pretended it didn't hurt just to keep the peace at home? You're not crazy. You're just tired of being disrespected. It took me years to understand that. That day, when he pointed at the door, I lowered my head like I always did. On the outside, I looked defeated. On the inside, my mind ran to a place I'd never said out loud. A detail, a document, a name, something I kept far away, like someone keeping a bulletproof vest hidden without telling anyone they're wearing it. I always knew certain truths can shift the balance of an entire house. My heart was racing, but I stayed quiet. He thought he'd won again, thought I was scared, and I was, just not in the way he assumed. It was a colder kind of fear, sharper, a fear that watches, that records, that waits. Before I went to sleep that night, lying in the dark and staring at the ceiling above me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not the usual despair, something else, silent, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. This story was only beginning, and he had no idea who was really holding everything up. After that night, the world didn't stop to check if I was okay. The next day showed up right on schedule, no warning, no softness. The alarm went off, I got up, made coffee, straightened the house. He left for work, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't pointed at the door just hours earlier. There was no apology, no conversation. And maybe that was what hurt the most. Realizing that, to him, it was just another piece of the routine. That's how my life always worked, on autopilot. I woke up before everyone else, handled what needed to be handled, solved problems before they could become inconveniences for anyone else. I knew where everything belonged in that house, but I didn't know where I belonged anymore. When everything was perfect, it was expected. When anything was off, it was my fault. The corrections always came in that calm, almost gentle tone, like advice. You left the light on. That wasn't the best seasoning. You could have done it differently. Never a full thank you, never the kind of recognition that actually warms you. Over time, I learned how to exist quietly. My steps got lighter, almost invisible. I closed doors slowly, set dishes in the sink without making noise, spoke softly on the phone even when I was alone. It was like I was constantly asking permission to take up space. And still, he referred to everything as my house. Every time I heard it, something tightened in my chest, like a warning I kept refusing to read. When we had people over, my role became even clearer. He talked, decided, told stories. I served coffee, collected cups, smiled when they expected me to smile. Sometimes he corrected me in front of everyone, always smiling. She gets confused sometimes. You know how sensitive she is. People would laugh awkwardly, and my face would burn. Later, when we were alone, if I said it hurt, the answer was already loaded and waiting. You take everything personally. And I swallowed it. I swallowed it because every argument ended with me smaller. I started disappearing in details. My clothes got more neutral, mostly muted colors. Not because I wanted to, but because it drew less attention. My opinions got shorter. My stories got told less. I avoided talking about dreams, plans, things I wanted for myself. It felt safer not to want. Wanting hurts when no one listens. Some days I'd sit alone in the living room, staring at everything spotless, and feel a hollow I couldn't explain. The house looked whole, but I felt broken, like living somewhere beautiful on the outside, but emotionally cold. I'd ask myself when I started feeling this way, so tired, so invisible, and the answer always came wrapped in guilt. Maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I really was too sensitive. For a long time, that constant doubt was the cruelest part. He decided everything, from big things down to tiny details. Where we'd go for the weekend, what we'd buy, who we'd see, how much we'd spend. There was always a logical justification, a neatly delivered argument, and I, to avoid conflict, agreed. Not because I truly agreed, but because I was exhausted from fighting and ending up wrong anyway. Over time, I realized it wasn't conversation, it was control. Polite, quiet control, but suffocating. The humiliations never came all at once. They were small, constant, almost invisible to anyone looking from the outside. A joke here, a correction there, a disapproving look when I said something off script. It didn't seem big enough to call abuse. I didn't call it that either. But together, those little things erased me. I got smaller inside my own life. At night, lying in bed, I'd stare at the ceiling in the dark. My shoulders ached, my mind wouldn't shut off. I replayed the whole day, thinking about what I did, what I didn't do, what I should have said and didn't. I thought about how I ended up there. The fear of aging alone was still there, but now it came with a bigger fear, disappearing completely without anyone noticing. And in that silence, something started to shift. I began observing more, not out of curiosity, but out of need. I started paying attention to his words, his habits, his schedule. Silence stopped being just submission and slowly started becoming strategy, even if I didn't have a name for it yet. Every comment I swallowed, every humiliation I didn't answer, I stored inside me like an invisible note. I also started organizing papers more: bills, documents, folders, not in an obvious way, almost automatically, like someone cleaning out drawers to keep their mind busy. But there was something different in the way I did it: more care, a need to know exactly where the things connected to my life were. When my fingers touched certain papers, I felt a strange steadiness, like there was something there that anchored me. He started noticing my deeper quiet. "You've been really quiet lately. Are you okay?" The questions didn't come from real concern, more like someone sensing that something slipped out of their control. I'd say I was tired, and I was. Tired of explaining, tired of justifying my existence, tired of trying to fit into a space that kept shrinking. Maybe if you're listening, you recognize this routine. Days that all look the same, small pains no one sees, exhaustion that doesn't go away even after sleep. How many times have you felt like your presence was just tolerated? How many times have you made yourself smaller just to fit? You're not crazy, you're just tired of being disrespected. The detail that truly started bothering me, and that I only saw clearly during that time, was how he talked about the house. Always mine, never ours. Every time I heard it, something tightened in my chest, like a quiet alarm. I didn't know exactly why yet, but that detail started weighing more than it should have. That night, after one more joke at my expense in front of other people, I went to the bedroom early. I sat on the bed, took a deep breath, and felt a tightness in my chest that wasn't just sadness. It was warning. Something inside me said I needed to pay attention, that this routine, this silence, these repeated words weren't just burnout. And there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, a thought started forming, heavy enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. What if everything I believe about my place in this house is wrong? After that question refused to leave my mind. What if everything I believe about my place in this house is wrong? I started seeing things I had overlooked for years. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, almost unnoticeable, like living with a constant ache and only realizing how heavy it is when you stop pretending it doesn't hurt. The silence that once protected me began serving another purpose. It allowed me to observe. I started listening more than I spoke. Every word he said began to sound different. When he said, "my house," it no longer felt like a habit. It sounded like ownership. When he said, "if I decide," or "if I want to," something inside me stiffened before I even formed a thought. My body reacted first. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, that familiar knot in my stomach. This wasn't exaggeration, it was delayed awareness. I began noticing the details of daily life, the predictable schedules, the exact place where he dropped his keys, the chair he always took at the table, like an invisible throne. Everything followed a pattern, and strangely enough, that predictability brought clarity. For years, I had lived reacting. Now I was simply watching. And watching gave me a quiet sense of internal control I had never experienced before. Some objects in that house carried more emotional weight than they appeared to. An old cabinet in the hallway, a folder of documents that was almost never opened, drawers I organized myself, drawers no one else truly knew. I handled those things carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect for what they represented. They were fragments of a story I had learned to silence in order to keep living. One afternoon, when he wasn't home, I opened a box stored on the top shelf of the closet. Inside were old papers, yellowed envelopes, documents I had avoided revisiting. My hands trembled slightly, not from panic, but from recognition. I sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, and went through everything slowly. Each page brought back memories I had pushed away just to survive, decisions I made alone, moments when I had to be strong without an audience. There, in that quiet, I felt something different from fear. I felt clarity. Not anger, not a desire to confront, understanding, as if a fog were slowly lifting. I realized that the control he exercised didn't come only from his firm posture or calm voice. It came from his certainty that I wouldn't question him, that I wouldn't look too closely. And for years, I had confirmed that certainty. I began storing small details in my memory, interrupted conversations, poorly chosen phrases, moments when he contradicted himself without noticing. I didn't write anything down. I wrote it into myself. Each detail became a piece of a puzzle that didn't yet show the full picture, but was already starting to make sense. He noticed my shift, even if he couldn't name it. "You've been distant," he said one night, looking at me over his plate. I said I was tired, and I was, but not just physically. I was tired of not listening to myself, tired of doubting my own perceptions every time something felt wrong. Sometimes I thought about the beginning of the marriage, about how I accepted that life out of fear of being alone. For the first time, I didn't judge myself for it. I understood. I did what I could with the emotional tools I had at the time. That understanding brought a new calm, not relief, preparation, the sense that I was finally on my own side. I started organizing my personal things more deliberately: clothes, documents, objects. Not like someone preparing to run, but like someone who needs to know exactly where they stand. There was something deeply grounding about recognizing what was mine, touching my belongings and feeling that they still belonged to me despite everything. Fear still showed up, especially at night. Lying in bed, listening to his breathing beside me, I wondered if I was imagining things, if it was all in my head. Those doubts were old companions. They always surfaced when I started seeing too much. But now something was different. I couldn't pretend blindness anymore. One careless comment confirmed it. He said he didn't like surprises and that everything needed to stay under control. The words echoed inside me. A chill ran up my spine. I didn't respond, I just nodded. But inside, I understood. He was afraid of losing control, even if he didn't yet know why. From then on, questions began to appear. Did you move anything? Do you know where those papers are? Casual on the surface, but restless underneath. I answered with short, neutral phrases. Each silence seemed to unsettle him more, and for the first time, that confirmed I wasn't imagining it. Maybe you listening to this part of my story are living something similar right now. That moment when things start to not make sense, but you don't have all the answers yet. Trust that. Not every realization needs to turn into immediate confrontation. Sometimes seeing clearly is already a form of protection. At that stage, I didn't have a clear plan. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I had attention. And attention, I learned, is a quiet form of power. Once you start seeing clearly, you can't pretend you don't see anymore. That night, as I turned off the bedroom light, an idea began to take shape, heavy and unavoidable. What if he isn't as much the owner of everything as he's always believed? That question stayed suspended in the dark, waiting for the right moment to grow teeth and change everything. The first shock didn't come the way I'd imagined for years. There was no yelling, no direct confrontation, no scene. It came quietly, sharp, contained, almost invisible to anyone else. It came on an ordinary day, the kind where nothing seems capable of threatening the routine. I was home alone, looking for a simple document, something I knew exactly where it should be. I opened the drawer. It wasn't there. I opened it again, more carefully. Still nothing. A cold wave moved through my body, slow and deliberate, like a warning. I tried to stay calm, took a deep breath, checked envelopes, folders, boxes. This wasn't disorganization, it was absence, too precise to be accidental. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit on the edge of the bed. My heart pounded out of rhythm like it was running ahead of me. For the first time in a long while, fear came back in full force. Not the old fear of being left, a new one, sharper, more dangerous. When he got home that night, I said nothing. I watched. He seemed calm, too calm. Ate dinner normally, made a comment about the TV, asked if I was okay. Normal. And that was exactly what put me on alert. I had learned that when something is wrong, the body knows before the mind does, and my body didn't relax for a second. Over the next few days, small signs started to surface. Drawers closed differently, papers slightly out of order, questions too casual for someone who always knew exactly where everything was. Did you move anything? Do you know where that document is? The words sounded light, but they carried tension. I answered briefly, always the same way, neutral, tired. Once again, silence became my shield. That's when something landed inside me with a dry, heavy weight. This wasn't curiosity, it was investigation. He wasn't just uneasy, he was testing boundaries, trying to see how far he could go without provoking a reaction. That absence wasn't carelessness, it was a signal that something in the balance of the house had shifted. And realizing that hurt more than any humiliation before. I felt invaded in a deep way. Not physically, but emotionally, like a line I had always kept protected had been crossed. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, feeling the weight of his breathing beside me while trying to organize my thoughts. For the first time, I wondered if the silence that had always protected me was still enough. Fear had a new face now. It wasn't just the fear of being discarded, it was the fear that he might realize not everything was under his control. And strangely, that fear came with a harsh clarity. I understood that the relationship had entered a new phase. It was no longer just silent domination. It was a dispute, still wordless, but real. I had to make an internal choice, not a dramatic decision, the kind that changes everything at once, but a small, irreversible one. I couldn't act the way I used to anymore. Pretending not to notice wasn't safe. Reacting impulsively would be worse. I needed to go deeper, watch more closely, protect what was mine before making any bigger move. I started paying attention to everything, his schedule, the places he touched, the moments when he grew too quiet. My body stayed on alert, like I was walking on thin ice. One wrong step could crack everything open. And at the same time, something unfamiliar was growing inside me. Not courage yet, preparation. A contained strength, organized by exhaustion. A few days later, he dropped a sentence that confirmed what I already knew. Almost casually, he said, "It was better to keep everything clear so there wouldn't be surprises later." The words hung between us. I gave a small smile, like I agreed, but inside, my stomach tightened. That wasn't conversation, it was a warning, an attempt to reassert control. That night, alone in the bedroom, I sat on the bed and took several deep breaths. My hands were sweaty, my heart raced. I felt tired in a profound way, like I was carrying years of silence on my shoulders. But along with the exhaustion came an uncomfortable certainty. I couldn't wait indefinitely anymore. What I had been guarding in silence was being sniffed out. And when that happens, you either move first or you get swallowed. It wasn't time to talk. It wasn't time to leave either. It was time to plan, to reorganize, to protect what was always mine without ever being spoken out loud. For the first time, I accepted internally that this story would demand more than passive endurance. It would demand strategy. As I turned off the light and lay in the dark, a heavy thought settled inside me. If he's started looking, it's because some part of him already knows the ground can give way. And it was there, in that quiet night, that I decided to go deeper, even without knowing yet how far this would take me. After that night, fear stopped being a constant background noise and began occupying a more defined space inside me. It was no longer scattered or vague. It was focused, alert. I started waking up before the alarm, heart racing, my body on edge even when the house felt too quiet. The silence no longer fooled me. I knew something was moving beneath the surface even if no one was saying a word. I began measuring every gesture with even more care, not out of submission, but out of self-protection. One misplaced word could ignite something I wasn't ready to face yet. So I chose silence, a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of acceptance, but the silence of someone who observes, who records, who waits for the right moment to move. He started watching me more closely, not with affection, but with suspicion, like he was trying to pinpoint exactly where I had changed. "You've been acting strange," he said once, pretending it was casual. I told him I was tired, and I was. Tired of explaining myself, tired of pretending everything was normal, tired of holding up a piece that only existed because I kept bending. There were days when fear almost convinced me to go back. Old thoughts crept in, telling me it might be better to keep doing what I'd always done, that pushing back could make everything worse. But all it took was remembering the empty drawer, the missing paper, the way he'd started asking too many questions. My body reacted instantly. My stomach twisted, my palms went damp. I knew it wasn't an overreaction. Something had shifted, and ignoring it now would be dangerous. I began revisiting old memories, the ones I'd always avoided looking at too closely. I thought about the beginning of the marriage, the first times I stayed quiet to avoid conflict, the small concessions that slowly became routine. For the first time, I didn't use those memories to punish myself. I looked at them with compassion. I did what I could to survive. And survival was never weakness. That's when something started organizing itself inside me. It still wasn't a clear plan with defined steps. It was more of an internal structure, a shift in posture. I started separating fear from strategy. Fear froze me. Strategy kept me alive. And I needed to stand on the right side of that line. I became more intentional about organizing my things, not just papers and documents, but my thoughts. I kept reminding myself, silently, that I didn't need to solve everything at once. Hurry has always been the enemy of anyone living under control. Every detail protected, every piece of information kept to myself bought me time, and at that moment, time was safety. At night, lying next to him, I felt the weight of his breathing fill the dark room. I thought about everything that could happen if I misstepped. Fear still came, yes, but it no longer ruled me the way it once had. It had changed roles. Now it was an alert, a signal telling me to stay sharp, not to retreat. He started testing boundaries in subtle ways, side comments, repeated questions, lingering looks when I touched certain things. I responded with trained normalcy. I don't remember. It should be around somewhere. A silence calm enough to unsettle someone expecting a reaction. Every measured response was a conscious choice. Not submission, but time. One day, almost without looking at me, he asked if I had stored any documents outside the house. My heart slammed hard against my ribs, but my face stayed calm. I said I didn't remember. The words came out steady, without a tremor. When he left the room, my legs gave out. I had to sit down. I took several deep breaths until my body caught up with the moment. That was when I realized how much this was demanding of me, and how much I was still standing. Fear was still there, yes, but it no longer ruled me the way it once had. It had changed roles. Now it was an alert, a signal telling me to stay sharp, not to retreat. I started trusting my perceptions, my body, my intuition. I'd spent years doubting myself, accepting versions of reality that weren't mine. I couldn't do that anymore. Not now. Slowly, my internal plan began to take shape. Not written down, but built through quiet decisions. Protect what is mine, don't reveal anything too soon, observe until I fully understand the terrain. I knew that when the moment came to speak, it couldn't be impulsive. It had to be calm, clear, and placed exactly where it belonged. Meanwhile, I kept the routine going, making coffee, organizing the house, living as if everything were the same. But inside, something had shifted permanently. I no longer saw myself as a guest. I was simply waiting for the moment to take up the space that had always been mine, without asking permission. That night, before falling asleep, staring once more at the ceiling in the dark, a thought settled in with surprising clarity. The silence I'm keeping now isn't fear, it's preparation. That certainty stayed with me as I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. The confrontation happened on the day he thought he finally had me cornered. It wasn't when I chose it. It was when he decided it was time to restore order once and for all. He asked me to talk on an ordinary morning, the kind where sunlight comes through the window without asking permission, lighting up a house that looked far too calm for what was about to unfold. He sat at the table, folded his hands, and began speaking in that controlled, almost instructional tone, like he was explaining something obvious to someone beneath him. He talked about responsibility, about organization, about clarity, said he was thinking about the future, that he didn't like surprises, that he needed to know exactly where he stood. As he spoke, his eyes never left me, tracking every breath, every movement. It felt like he was waiting for an apology, an explanation, anything that would pull him back to the center again. I listened in silence, not out of fear, but because I already knew this was the moment. When he finished, he asked if I had anything to say. The question came loaded with expectation, like he was offering me one last chance at submission. I took a deep breath. My heart was beating steady, not fast. When I spoke, my voice was low, stable, without a tremor. I said just one sentence, simple, direct. This house isn't yours. It never was. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. He laughed, a short, nervous laugh, like someone trying to turn discomfort into a joke. Said I was confused, that it didn't make sense, that I must be too tired. Once again, he tried to push me back into the role I'd always played. The overly emotional woman, the one who exaggerates, the one who's mistaken. This time, I didn't move. I stood up slowly, walked to the hallway cabinet, and came back with a folder in my hands. I set it on the table carefully, without rushing, like someone who knows exactly how much weight they're placing down. I opened the folder, took out a single paper, slid it toward him. The deed, my name on it, clear, old, unquestionable. No long explanation, no accusations, just the truth, placed exactly where it belonged. The color drained from his face. His hands, so steady just moments before, started to tremble. He read it, then read it again. His eyes scanned the lines as if searching for a hidden exit. He said there had to be a mistake, that it needed to be reviewed, that he'd never been told. I listened in silence. The same silence that had diminished me for years was now holding my ground. That was where the double twist landed. For him, it was delayed reality crashing in. For me, it was confirmation of something even deeper. The power he held over me never came from the house. It came from my silence, and the silence had changed sides. There was no yelling, no humiliation. There was steadiness, and that unraveled him completely. He shifted from denial to contained anger, said I was ungrateful, that he had given me everything. The words hit like an old echo. How many times had I heard that and accepted it as truth? This time, I answered, without raising my voice, without attacking. I said I hadn't asked for anything, that I'd sustained that house in silence, that survival is not a debt. Each word came out clean, without the emotional residue of years attached to it. He tried to regain control by imposing conditions, talking about rules, consequences. That's when I set boundaries. Clear ones, concrete ones, timelines. I said what would happen going forward and what would no longer happen. I left no room for emotional negotiation. I didn't over-explain. I'd learned that boundaries don't need long justifications. They need consistency. That conversation didn't end in reconciliation or explosion. It ended in collapse, the collapse of an image he'd upheld for years. owner, unquestioned authority, center of the house. I saw it in his eyes when he realized he could no longer threaten me with the door, because the door was never the weapon. Fear was, and fear no longer ruled me. When he left the room, I stayed seated for a few minutes, alone. Only then did my hands start to shake, when my body finally absorbed the delayed impact. I pressed my feet into the floor, took a deep breath, and felt the weight of everything that had happened. I didn't cry. What came instead was something else, a deep, heavy relief, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. The catharsis didn't come with applause. It came with silence. It came later that afternoon, when I walked through the house, touching the furniture, the walls, the floor, not like someone claiming ownership, but like someone recognizing something that had always been there. Every step seemed to return a part of me I'd left behind. In the days that followed, he moved through the house like someone disoriented, tried to talk, then withdrew, shifted between negotiation and isolation. The insecurity was his now. Every question he asked came loaded with fear, and I answered only what was necessary. Information was under my control now, and I knew exactly when to use it and when to keep it. A few days later, he tried to provoke me, saying I was cold, distant. I looked at him and answered with the most honest sentence I ever said. I just stopped being afraid. The words hung between us, too heavy to undo, because they were true. The fear that led me into that marriage was not the fear that now kept me standing. That night, alone in the bedroom, I sat on the bed and felt the exhaustion finally reach me. A good kind of tired, the honest kind that comes after crossing something hard and coming out whole. I thought about everything I endured, everything I swallowed, everything I planned in silence. And I understood that my victory wasn't in defeating someone else, it was in getting myself back. I stared at the ceiling in the dark and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not because everything was resolved, but because now I knew exactly where I was standing. The ceiling was still there, solid, and for the first time, I was fully aware of who was really holding it up. After the confrontation, the house never went back to what it was. And that, more than anything, proved that something had truly shifted. The silence took on a different texture. It was no longer oppressive or heavy, it was alert. He moved through the rooms carefully, like someone who had lost the map to a place he once believed he owned. His steps were more restrained, his questions more measured. For the first time in many years, I wasn't the only one calculating my movements. Justice didn't come in the form of an apology. There was no heartfelt acknowledgement, no healing conversation. And strangely, I didn't miss it. Justice came through the shift in power. It came from the fact that my words now carried weight, from the way my boundaries were no longer ignored, from how he avoided certain topics as if he knew the ground beneath him was no longer solid. I began reorganizing my life, calmly, without spectacle. No impulsive decisions, no dramatic announcements. The reorganization was practical, quiet, and deeply symbolic. Schedules redefined, spaces separated, conversations kept objective. Everything said clearly without over-explaining. I learned that when you explain too much, you invite the other person to negotiate what isn't negotiable. At times, he tried to regain control through emotion. Comments about everything he had done for me, attempts to provoke me with old memories, strategic silences. I recognized every move. I'd lived through them before. The difference was that now I didn't respond the way I used to. I didn't defend myself. I didn't justify my choices. I simply maintained what had already been decided. Consistency dismantles manipulation faster than confrontation ever could. His family noticed the change quickly. Side comments, questions disguised as concern, advice no one asked for. I listened once. The second time, I was direct. I said the matter concerned only him and me. I didn't raise my voice, I wasn't aggressive, just firm. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but my chest felt light. It was the first time I hadn't backed down to preserve harmony. Some people drifted away. Others revealed themselves. There were those who chose the more comfortable version of the story, the one where I was difficult, cold, ungrateful. I accepted it. Not everyone can handle a woman who stops bending. Emotional justice also means accepting that not everyone will applaud your change. And that's okay. It wasn't for them, it was for me. The routine adjusted gradually. Small things first. I no longer asked permission for decisions that belonged to my life. I communicated them, and that alone changed everything. My body still felt the impact. Change is tiring. Rebuilding after years of silence requires energy. There were days I sat alone in the living room and cried, not out of regret, out of grief. Grief for the woman I had been, for the time that passed, for the versions of me that survived quietly. Allowing that grief was part of justice. Pretending to be strong all the time only creates new wounds. I gave myself that space without guilt. Crying didn't pull me backward, it carried me forward with more honesty. Little by little, he began to understand that the territory he had used as a tool for control had collapsed. Not because I shouted, but because I stayed firm. The insecurity was his now. I saw it in his eyes, in the silences, in the failed attempts to reclaim the center. And I felt no pleasure in it. This wasn't revenge, it was consequence. I started thinking about the future differently, not with urgency, but with clarity. I thought about the kind of life I wanted from that point on, the kind of peace I was willing to accept, the kind of relationship I would no longer tolerate. Reorganizing your life isn't about erasing the past, it's about deciding it no longer controls the next chapter. Maybe you listening to this part of my story are right here now, after the confrontation, when everything feels strange, unstable, yet oddly more real. If that's you, I want you to hear this. It's not weakness to feel tired after standing your ground. It's proof you spent too long holding yourself together. Emotional justice doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in delayed respect, in someone else's silence, in space reclaimed. And for me, that was enough to keep breathing lighter. When I realized the house was still standing, that I was still there, whole, I felt something rare. Stability. Not because everything was resolved, but because now I knew exactly where I was standing. Today, when I walk through the house in silence, that silence no longer hurts. It doesn't tighten my chest, weigh on my shoulders, or steal my breath. It rests. I feel it in the way my feet touch the floor, in the slower rhythm of my steps, in the calm of no longer having to measure every movement. The same roof is still above my head, the same walls, the same rooms. But everything is different because I am different. For a long time, I believed survival meant enduring, swallowing things down, giving in, adapting. I thought silence was a sign of maturity, that fear was caution, that staying was proof of strength. Today, I understand that real survival is something else entirely. It's recognizing the limit. It's noticing the moment when staying hurts more than changing. It's choosing yourself even when your heart still shakes. I don't romanticize what I lived through. I don't believe the suffering was necessary to teach me something beautiful. Suffering doesn't educate anyone. What transforms us is the moment we stop accepting what diminishes us. I took longer than I wish I had. I stayed longer than I wanted to. But I arrived. And arriving counts too. Arriving whole, without having to become someone else to get there. So many times, I asked myself if there was still time. If, after so many years, it still made sense to stand up for myself, reorganize my life, change direction. Today, I know that question is born from exhaustion, not truth. As long as we're breathing, there's still choice. There's still dignity within reach. There's still room for respect, starting with the respect we give ourselves. I didn't run away. I didn't disappear. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I stayed standing. And sometimes staying is the bravest act there is. I set boundaries, I reorganized my life, I accepted losses, and little by little I recovered something I thought I'd left behind, my own voice. If you've made it this far listening to my story, I want to speak directly to you now. Maybe you also made choices out of fear. Maybe you're living in silence, feeling like you're slowly fading just to keep everything functioning. I'm not here to tell you what to do. Every woman has her own timing, her own story, her own risks. But I need you to know this. You are not wrong for being tired. Exhaustion is also a signal, and it deserves to be heard. Don't ignore what your body is trying to tell you. That tightness in your chest, that sadness that shows up without explanation, that silence that feels heavy. None of that is weakness. Those are warnings, and you deserve to meet them with care, not guilt. My life today isn't perfect. There are still hard days, uncomfortable conversations, memories that hurt when they decide to surface. The scars are real, but there's something now that didn't exist before: internal safety. I know who I am. I know what I hold up. I know what I will no longer accept. And that changes everything. The roof is still there, but now I know without a doubt who truly holds it up. And that awareness changes how I walk through the world, how I take my place, how I see myself in the mirror. I'm no longer a guest in my own life. I'm present. Maybe this story was a mirror for you. Maybe it stirred memories, pain, questions. If so, I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share it in the comments. Your voice matters here. Sometimes putting our experience into words is the first step toward no longer feeling invisible. Before we close, I want to leave you with a simple but powerful gesture. Tonight, before you go to sleep, write down 3 things you will no longer accept in your life. Don't show it to anyone. It's between you and yourself. Small decisions, when honored, build deep change. I'm still here, feet on the ground, heart lighter than it's been in many years. Not because everything is resolved, but because now I know I can protect myself. And that, to me, is victory. Thank you for listening. You deserve to live under a roof where respect exists, starting within yourself.